Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Claire Weisz and Jake Barton.
Thank you. Thank you. We always appreciate the voice of God introducing us, right, Jake? So I'd like to use this 5 minutes to kind of get behind two statements that, while being the curator for MAS's and Knight Foundation's Reimagining the Civic Commons, this was kind of agreed upon in many cities in the United States and as a group, which is the civic commons, which we've heard referred to as the public realm and public space and digital commons, is what makes cities cities. The other statement that kind of jumped out was that it allows us to do together what we can't do alone. And in a sense, the number of times neighborhood came up in the previous presentations, I found myself asking, so what did that speaker mean by neighborhood? So what I really want to ask all of you is, so what's changed about our cities and our thinking that we're asking these questions? When you look at parts of cities that, like here, the former Watchtower properties, that were monolithic, that were about a certain kind of production and job, and I would say that planners are actually thinking differently, and they have been for a while, but now they're actively agreeing that separation of uses in any form of cities actually works against these organic forces that you see happening digitally, which is the ultimate kind of free flow of information and connection. And there's some facts that really back this up. Co-working space in 2005, basically zero, and now, and I'll blame the Huffington Post here, has them at almost 800 co-working spaces, and these are non-commercial ones, and all of you know many commercial ones. How often have you gone to a coffee shop in the last 5 years to actually do work, right? Or to connect to someone? Well, then it makes sense that there's 20,000. There was 20,000 in 2012, and I would say there's probably another 50% increase since then. The numbers of farmers markets across the United States is now numbering around 8,000. There's a huge resurgence in public markets, so not only just farmers markets, but public markets, Pike's Place, Eastern Market in Detroit, maybe here in New York one of these days. But the facts are dismal, actually. You're looking here at Stuyvesant Cove, a huge amount of investment, public and private, but when you look at parts of it that are still unimproved, it makes sense that we're down to 0.5%. And it's still, even unimproved, we're active if the population is there, they're connecting, and they're trying to use these spaces anyway. So what does this look like as a diagram? Basically, we have these civic assets, which you heard the previous panel talk about, and you have people and what they really want to do. And you have that little purple intersection, and they're finding ways to push governments, neighbors, communities to try and use them and finance them in a way that they're more accessible to their needs. What could happen if we reimagined many of these resources, not just physically, but in a way how we access them economically, and how everyone gets to access them in different times and places. Ultimately, we could satisfy more people who happen to be both moving back to cities, but also people in cities that are losing populations by bringing more of the civic commons to those places. But this is sort of where I get behind the statements. There's facts, and there's the fact that there's higher standards in places that actually work, and they work across generations, and bluntly, they change your mood. So it doesn't matter if I go to the New York Public Library with my laptop. What's important is that the space itself is meaningful, and the people there are searching for information in many forms. Equally, it doesn't matter if a if a stage was meant for one purpose originally, and this is in a new park we designed in the Rockaways, but when you have a program about putting pianos everywhere in the city, you're going to put one on a stage if it's available. And if there is a space that has a path already there, and it's city-owned and you have a chance to use it, this ultimate access might even spur use by schools, use by libraries, new forms of defining community centers. But ultimately, I think there's a deep question, which is, what do people do, and why is most of what we do not valued in these equations? So here we're at the high line, but does the high line get a little piece of everyone's clicks and everyone's tweets? I think not. And when you look at the struggle it took to understand the value behind this already huge public investment in infrastructure, then I think it's easier to understand that where our economy was when we made public markets, where people, this was the former fish market, when the amount of exchanges between people, what got talked about yesterday at the panel, which is what is happening to those relationships that you valued, not because you were family or friends, but you had a regular exchange with someone, that's what's being lost in cities. And how do we bring that back? And those companies that first ventured into the public realm to put restaurants like Shake Shack, I think have seen the huge benefits of it. I'm just going to go right to the end since I'm pushing. So I want to quickly say, so what's it about? Is it about what we see, or is it about who sees us? And here we are at Brooklyn Bridge Park. And obviously it's about individuals having a place and a desire for the civic commons. So our new dashboards start to help us, but in a lot of ways they don't connect, and this is the last slide, to a way that our own exchanges and things that we do for the positive don't get counted, and therefore the funding of these places, like New Year's Eve, like Creative Time, like science fairs, don't get measured the same way as real estate does. So anyways, I'll leave you with that, and I'm going to pass it on to Jake.
Thank you so much. Awesome. So I'm going to just tell a quick story and then go through a little bit of sort of visions that we have for the Civic Commons, which we're engaged in through the Knight Foundation, local projects such as media installations in museums and public spaces. And so Knight asked us to think about the future of Civic Commons and technology. And just the story I wanted to tell was about the TED conference. You probably know them well. In 2009, they had over 100 million views. But they're really looking how to, quote unquote, bring it to the next level. And so they did something very, very surprising. They essentially opened up their institution, their brand, if you will, to what's called TEDx. And so they essentially gave a free license to people who are willing to host similar conferences. And since then, since 2009, they've had over 5,000 TEDx's in over 800 cities. And I think that is a parable for how to think about the Civic Commons. I have 4 minutes left, and I'm going to try and convince you that the ways that these institutions are thinking can be really changed overnight by thinking about them much more as a platform than as an institution. And this is the revolution I would put forward. Because essentially, if you think about cities in general and these institutions specifically, they have a bunch of common elements that get put together, right? They have space, they have people, they're forwarding a mission, they're using technology or different assets or resources or skills towards that end. But within cities themselves, there's a bunch of very specific conditions that make these things possible. And so I want to argue not on the TED side, but really on the TEDx side, meaning this sort of bottom-up, emergent systems that are essentially forwarding what these institutions are trying to do. And so I just want to run by you a bunch of examples that I'm sure you're aware of. But in Inwood, we have different language institutes happening in laundromats. This is my favorite. This is actually from Detroit. This is Rogue Riders. They actually go out and do maintenance on public parks in Detroit because these spaces are falling apart. Right, if you think about the Uni project, so these are sort of ad hoc pop-up reading rooms that happen in underserved locations. Cities are really about community and about culture and how to bring those things together. These are naturally occurring phenomena. So you see people organizing, self-organizing for guerrilla gardening, taking over empty spots here in New York City to revitalize them and green them. Or Boogie Down Bronx, we've heard about this before, but essentially honoring the culture, everything from mambo to hip-hop in the South Bronx, supported by an institution but still powered from the bottom up. Or the League of Kitchens, this is absolutely one of my favorites. These are cooks who want to learn about different ethnic cuisines, so they partner with different immigrant families in their homes for full-day cooking lessons. This is amazing cultural exchange. Or even this Laundromat project for community arts workshop, really looking towards public space in a new redefinition of what it is to make these various and sundry connections, right? And cities are obvious about learning and about shared passions. That's really what drives people within cities, are those types of opportunities. So you think about Hack Manhattan, a physical space which is gathering people with very, very interesting and overlapping but also diverse concerns. So this is both professional and also has an exploratory aspect. Or Brooklyn Brainery, which is a specific sort of bottom-up teaching atmosphere, or even the variation on that, trade school, where you literally can trade classes in coding or in archaeology for a bottle of wine or a knit hat or a self-taught lesson in something else. The ways in which people are able to organize around these specific themes can even come together in something like this, where you're offering the specific access to tools, but also the skills to use them, and access to other people who have these other shared passions. Or this is obviously one of my favorites, Improv Everywhere, which everyone's seen. The capacity to, again, in unexpected and delightful ways, bring people together, right? I mean, this is something that you want to participate in. This isn't something that you want to drag people towards. There's this amazing example that the architect Bjarke Ingels uses when he talks about multiculturalism in a park that he designed. He said, you know, people don't go eat Chinese food because they want to be nice to Chinese people. Right? They like Chinese food. It's delicious. It's amazing. And so the question is, how can we find these capacities within cities, within these institutions, that people really want to engage in? I just gave you all of these organizations that have self-organized, that have spontaneously come together. What do they have all in common is technology. Right? The fact that they can organize around these different ideas so seamlessly relative to 50 or 100 years ago is really based on the fact that in one way or the other, they're all happening through technology. That's what brings the interest together that seamlessly. That's literally what makes it possible to have something like the Mower Gang happen. It wouldn't happen with just people calling each other 50 years ago. This is a whole new ballgame for cities. And when you think about it, in terms of the great ideas with unmet needs and the impulse to express, learn, and change, and you put these all together, and this is, I think, where we get to the civic commons, where you can put together people and mission, use technology to power the access to the space. That's really what's going to let these institutions turn into platforms. And with that, I think everyone will win. Thanks so much.
You are so